Yes.
All right. So thank you so much, Dan, for taking your time out and doing this interview with us. Really appreciate it. It means a lot. I've been planning this for quite some time now. So finally, the last time I met you, I was still in Silicon Valley, and now I'm in Texas. So
Nice.
it's been some time. So I would just do a quick introduction for you, and just if you want to add anything, to basically elaborate about you, just go ahead. So you
Sure.
are an author of the Lean Product Playbook.
That's right.
Rated 4.6. I actually got one too here.
Nice. There you go.
So it's
4.7.
4.7, and you
go.
have 563 reviews. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you are listed number 6 in lean management, category, number 6 in business marketing, and number 10 in business entrepreneurship. I mean, these are really good numbers, like, on the chart, if you look at the overall category. So I just want to read out a quote from Sean Ellis, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That people kind of get quick idea like what this book is about. So Dan's playbook is the missing manual on how to apply lean startup principles. This comprehensive, straightforward book guides you through everything you need to know how to build a winning product. Amazing. 100% correct. And I don't know if I remember, at least I have gifted this book to 10 people, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
And this is a new copy. I just got it, like, because I gave all my copies. So this is my
nice.
2 days ago I got this one.
Nice.
I don't know, did you make any new revisions? Not really, right?
No, it's been 6 years. And
okay.
As you said, like, it's still like, top 10 in multiple categories, kind of number changes. The other day, it's funny, actually, just a couple of days ago, David Bland, who co-wrote Testing Business Ideas with Alex Osterwalder, the creator of the business model canvas, just tweeted a picture from Amazon where, like, it was his book, my book, and Teresa Torres' brand new book, Continuous Discovery Habits, all 3 together in whatever ranking it was. So so it's been 6 years. I have not updated it. A lot of the content is pretty evergreen. The fundamental principles for how you build good products haven't changed. I do have some newer case studies and additional things that I just, writing a book takes a lot of effort. So I just didn't have time to do it. But since then, in some of my talks and blog posts and workshops, I share a few additional, like, curated case studies to further solidify the points. So luckily it's been evergreen.
Great. Congratulations. I mean,
thanks.
I personally call it the Bible of product management. I think probably in one of my reviews on Amazon, I believe I said that. So I know, I believe it. It did really help me with my product, so I can vouch for it. It's not just something I read it. I was able to apply it. It's very practical. So with my product listing pro, I actually used your framework, the triangle, on my product, like a seal, and saying, like, this is a product market fit. And it was just cool. So it's definitely, I can vouch for this book for any newcomer, new product manager, or not even new, like people who want to just reference at any time as a product manager. Definitely a go-to book.
And that's why you said, like, it's pragmatic and applied. That makes me very happy, because that's my goal. There are a lot of books out there that are very theoretical or academic, but then you don't know what you're supposed to do. And so a lot of people, you'll see in the Amazon reviews, they keep it on their desk. They're like, hey, this is one of the few books I keep on my desk, because they have sticky notes and tabs on different sections. And then whenever they're about to do user research, like, they'll go look at that section. Or if they're about to do a roadmap, they go look at that section. So that was the intent, for it to be a reference like that. So it makes me happy when people say that.
Absolutely. All right.
We are giving away a free copy of this amazing book to one lucky winner. For more details, please check out the pinned comment on this video.
So just, I know you mentioned in a lot of your interviews about, you started coding at early age, and, you have engineering background, you got your engineering degree, and then you went to work for Navy as a submarine designer, engineer. Okay, that's just so I was curious to ask you, do you have a picture in a uniform?
What's funny is where I work, Sam, we didn't wear uniforms, because
I assumed,
it's funny because I do, from back when I was Navy ROTC, so I have some pictures of me in uniform, but
Oh,
When I
okay.
graduated from college and went to work, we didn't wear uniforms because it's a joint Department of Navy, Department of Energy, because
Oh,
of the
okay.
nuclear power aspects. And it's actually a good thing because, one of the things about the military sometimes is it can be very hierarchical. And
Right.
so if someone has a higher rank than you, they can tell you kind of what to do and you just have to do it. You can't push back.
Right. Right.
We
Right. Right.
don't, when you work in a technical organization, you don't want that. You want just like the
Okay.
best ideas and arguments to win. So
Right.
that's one of the things I really loved about where I worked. It was kind of like NASA for submarines is probably the best analogy I
Yeah.
can say.
Yeah.
Where, we were basically, doing technical design of submarines, and you want that kind of free exchange of ideas and debate and discussion. And so, I was very fortunate early in my career to work in a place that was a technical meritocracy like that. So what really mattered the most was not your experience or your age or your rank or anything like that. What mattered was the strength of your arguments and evidence and data, which was great.
Absolutely. And I think you are probably the only person I can think of, or I know, based on my career as a product manager, is who has this kind of background in Navy, and that kind of rocket science sort of experience. Who you bring all that raw experience to product management, and it's just amazing. And I think that's one of the things that separates you from everybody else. I think
Thanks,
that.
Sam. Yeah, and I've thought about that because that was my first job out of college, so it was very formative. And the interesting thing is, my job title was technically engineer, and there's no
Okay.
doubt we were doing engineering. But
Right.
honestly, it was very similar to product management
Okay.
because, and the interesting thing about a submarine or any product is at a high level, you can think about high level phases of kind of requirements definition, design, construction, and like testing. Let's break it up into those kind of four, right?
Okay.
In a submarine, it may take maybe 3 years to build and test it. You will spend like 8 or 9 years on requirements and design. Like you have to. It's because if you get it wrong, you can't change it. It's like metal.
So
So I started the
okay.
first product I ever worked on. We spent the bulk of the product lifecycle on requirements and definition and design. So, so that's why talking about the problem space, we spent a lot of time in the problem space before we went to solutions and design things, because we had to get it right. And so I was trained early on, like, hey, let's get the requirements right before we
Okay.
go and design this thing. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at. So then when I became
Right.
a PM at Intuit, I had never had that title or worked in software development before. I was like, oh, wait, this feels very familiar. We're getting clear on requirements, and then we're going to do the design, and then we're going to build it, and then we're going to
Right.
test it. But the very few products, especially on the web, you spend way more time, the bulk of the time just building it, right? You don't spend a lot of
Right.
time defining or designing it. So anyway, that I think is what
Absolutely.
sets my experience a little bit apart. There aren't that many products where you spend so much time in the definition and design
Right.
phases.
Right. So did you guys call that like a waterfall, or I mean, definitely not agile. It
It was,
wasn't
no,
definitely.
it's waterfall. It has
Yeah.
to be a
Yeah.
waterfall, because it's like,
Okay.
and that's the thing is, people like, I love Agile for software. It makes a lot of sense. People like to just kind of make fun of waterfall anywhere, but there are
Right.
certain products, as I like to say, a submarine, you don't want to build the MVP, launch it, have it sync, and go, oh, I guess we'll iterate to version 1.1, right?
Right.
Or a space shuttle, same thing. So there's
Right.
certain products, when the stakes are high, when the risks are very high, you want
Right.
to kind of be more waterfall. When it's like, hey, we can patch this thing in an hour if we get something wrong, then it
Right.
makes sense that the bar would be, you'd err more towards speed versus risk,
Right.
versus
Right.
higher risk.
So just a little bit more, I want to dig deep into, like, you didn't have, like, you went from school engineering to Navy. Like, how did you figure that out? Like, you wanted to do submarine, and was it like, did you have some sort of prior experience that you were able to get into submarine stuff? Like, that's like super geeky stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I'll
Yeah.
tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you how it works. So the way it works is, it's very limited. So when you get into like a Navy officer selection program, whether it's the Naval Academy or Navy ROTC or OCS, as you approach graduation, you have to figure out which part of the Navy are you going to go for. And there
Okay.
aren't that many parts. At a high level, to keep it simple, there's like surface warfare, like ships that are on the surface. There are submarines, and then there's like planes, aviation, helicopters, and planes. Those are the three main branches of the Navy. So everyone in the Navy, as they're approaching becoming graduation, becoming an officer, has to try to select for one of those things, right?
Okay.
So I had been out on a submarine, because during college, during the summer, you go out on ships and submarines and planes to kind of get
Okay.
exposure to figure out what you want to do. So my very first time at sea in the Navy was on a submarine out of Hawaii, and it was an amazing experience. And,
Okay.
lots of people in the armed forces are very, very sharp. The submarine community is known to have very sharp people in it. And in fact, in the military, the difference between the enlisted and the officers usually just means, did they go to college or not? And how did they get into the Navy? In the submarine world in particular, the differences between enlisted and officers are very, they're like almost not there. Probably most people that are enlisted in the submarine community, it's because they couldn't go to college because like one of their parents died and they had to stay home and take care of it. Like some kind of technicality prevented them. But as far as how sharp they are, they're just as sharp as the officers. And so it's a very special community of very smart people. Again, it's like NASA. It's like you have to be really smart. And so I was attracted to it for that reason. And then it turns out that the part of the Navy that I worked in, it's actually a subset where most of the people in the submarine community actually go out and operate the submarines, right? We've got all these submarines around the world. They need to be operated by people. But where I interviewed for, if you were, what you had to do is you had to be an engineering major,
Okay.
and you had to have a good GPA. That's basically what you had to have. And if you had a really good GPA and an engineering major, you might get invited to apply for this part of the Navy that's called naval reactors. And it was actually formed a long time ago when nuclear power first came out by one of my heroes, actually Admiral Hyman Rickover. And what happened is he was a captain in the Navy. And as the nuclear power was emerging, he realized, gosh, this would make an excellent power source for a submarine, because submarines normally before that, they had to use fuel. So they have to surface and refuel. And the whole point of a submarine is you don't want to have to surface so people don't know where you're at. You're very stealthy. And so he single-handedly created that industry. I mean, he's kind of like a Steve Jobs in that world. He single-handedly created a strong personality, super sharp, kind of built an org that scaled around him. So anyway, I was fortunate to invite to interview for that. Once I learned about it, I said, this sounds like the best job in the Navy for me. And I applied and I was lucky to get it. So that's kind of how I got into that particular path.
Great. Thank you so much for that
Sure.
extra bit. So, and you worked as a PM at Intuit. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a little bit. And then you also did consultation for Microsoft, Facebook, and Box, to name few. And you did a startup called Friendster. And
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, great. And is there any other startup you want to mention that you were involved with as a co-founder or your partner? Okay.
No, sounds like you know my resume pretty good.
Okay, all right. And you've been helping product teams for 12 years now, just to put it out there.
16.
16? Oh wow,
Yeah.
I thought I did my math right. Okay,
No, it's okay.
Okay,
2005.
thanks.
2005.
Okay, perfect. And you run a meetup group with over 10,000 members now.
That's right.
Based out of Silicon Valley, but I believe it's probably global now because of COVID.
It is, yeah. We used to have it in Palo Alto, then we moved it to Mountain View at Intuit's headquarters, which was a special treat for me because I started my PM career there. But then when COVID came, we couldn't have in-person events. And I remember I was sitting on my couch with my wife. I'm like, I guess I'll just take it online. And the second it was March 2020, the second I posted on LinkedIn, all these people are like, oh my gosh, this is great. Now I can attend. I always wanted to go, but I don't live nearby. So we get people from all over the States now, South America, Canada. We get people actually in Europe and Africa that stay up late. And then we get a lot of people from New Zealand and Australia because the time zone works out. They're just 5 hours before us. So that's what kind of propelled our growth to over 10,000 is COVID. We've always had a good growth rate, but with COVID, we've got better access. It doesn't make sense. You have, instead of having to be within 20 miles of Mountain View, California, now anybody can dial in. So it's great.
So there's no in-person anymore, right? It's all
not right now. I'm excited to bring it back. That's the one thing everybody kind of misses. But I think when I do bring it back, I'm still going to try to just Zoom it concurrently because we have such a following now around the world.
Absolutely. Just to get an idea, pre-COVID, you had like how much, like 5,000-6,000 members, and then how many members did you have?
It was probably like eight or nine.
Okay, that's
just the rate of growth went up. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for almost. It's been over 7 years ago since I founded it in 2014. So we've had steady growth, but it's just like we got a little more growth because of COVID.
Yeah, I personally attended a lot of those sessions. They were all amazing. I mean, okay, and there was a lot of good food too.
I know. The funny thing is the logistics is a little easier for online. You don't have to worry about is the food going to be here on time and all that jazz. Can the person get in the doors? All that stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And just to wrap up your introduction, I want to just mention this part that Dan, you are one of the few guys I would say in the Valley who are very approachable, and you've been very I was able. We went out for dinner.
I remember lunch at NOLA in Palo Alto. I remember.
Yeah. So that was really nice of you. So I just want to put it out there. You're not just an awesome product leader. You are also an awesome guy at the personal level.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's tough. I like to be accessible to people. the unfortunate fact is you get super busy. So I get so many pings of people, asking me for things, and I try to get back to as many as I can, but I got 2 kids, I got a lot going on, but I'm glad that we were able to get together. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, even though you are I consider you as my mentor, even though, I mean, there wasn't really like a mentor-mentee relationship, because we were like, whenever whenever I needed advice, I used to message you, and you were very, helpful, and you used to get back to me, and you were the guy who told me to go to product school, and I did, and that was really one of the best things I did as part of
Cool.
my career.
I'm glad to hear that. I'll tell Carlos,
Yeah,
Carlos,
shout
the
out
founder.
to Carlos and
I
Product School guys.
will.
Yeah.
He, because they sponsored the meetup in the early days of Product School, and I think it helped give them traction. And he and I, I speak at Product School events, and he comes and speaks. We do a panel every once in a while. We used to do it more because, usually I bring in a top speaker, but I like to do a panel discussion every once in a while, because a lot of people trying to break into PM, or new PMs trying to up-level their skills. So that's when I like to go to a panel format. I usually have Carlos and like 1 or 2 other people. So I'm planning that next, I don't know exactly when it's going to be, maybe October, but I'm planning that next kind of panel discussion. But I'm glad to hear you got a good experience there.
Yeah. I'm going to definitely try to get Carlos on this interview, one of my next sessions. But yeah, thank you so much. All right. Now let's get into, actually, before we talk about the meat of the session, I want to go a little back all the way to your origin. Like, tell me a little about your childhood, actually, because I think it's very important. A lot of people, I guess, don't realize, or that you're, as a child, there are things that you nourish, or you learn that subconsciously, consciously, that help you develop and help you become who you are. So wherever you want to start, whatever you remember, how your childhood was,
I don't know if I'll go that far back, but the way I usually start the story is that my parent would set me down the tech track a little bit, is the fact, or made me open to it or think about it, is the fact that my parents got me a computer when I was 9, right?
Okay.
And that was, when PC, personal computers were coming out. It wasn't even PCs. It was like the Apple, the Atari 800, the Commodore 64. It was those days, right? And so my parents they actually got me a VIC-20 first, which is, if you know about it, it's not really capable. And then after a year, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And we got a Commodore 64, right? But the interesting thing, and I also had an Atari before that, I'm a little older. So the Atari,
I know Atari. I know
Atari 2600, and playing in the, it was like the height of the arcades at the malls. You'd go and play like Pac-Man and Defender. I mean, it was like the explosion of games. So the main reason you would have an Atari is to play games with your friends. And then the same thing for the Commodore. It was like the best game machine ever. You just play games with your friends at the best games, right? But along the way, you also like learn to code a little bit. I learned to code a little bit, which was great.
I want to stop there. Like, what got you really into coding? I mean, hold on. Yeah. I want to ask you, were you the kind of guy who used to break things and, try to fix things, like, very hands-on guy, like as growing up?
A little bit, not like a lot. I know some people that are Mr. Fix-It or Mrs. Fix-It that, and I don't mind doing it. I love doing that. When I get a chance to do that, I like that. In fact, it was just my birthday, and my wife said, what would you like for your birthday? I'm like, if I had time, I would love to be like a robot. I love to do like robotic stuff, right? Because I have like a double E background. I learned mechanical engineering in the Navy for submarines. So like, if I had just spare time, I would be geeking out in the garage, being a maker, doing like robotics with my kids and stuff. I just, so that's my aspiration. So I did a little bit of that, but it was more just, a couple things. One is, it's just more like, because you could, like, you play a game and you play these games and you think they're pretty cool. It's like, hey, maybe I'll try to make a game. And I never really made a game. I kind of plotted it out. I remember actually, I designed my own font. I made a whole alphabet in a font back in the day, which is
that kind of details I'm looking for. That
like an 8-bit font, like for an adventure game. I made, like you're sitting there on graph paper, you have to pick out the pixels and stuff like that.
So you were creative. That was cool. You were creative.
A little bit. A little bit. I love, I love graph paper, and then the other thing, probably the first functional program that I wrote so my dad was in the Navy, so I traveled every once in a while as a child. And so when I was 9, we arrived at a new location in Spain, actually. So there's a Navy base in southern Spain, which is paradise. It's called Rota. If anyone, the small number of people who are listening have ever been there, it's paradise, basically. Like my backyard, you look out my backyard, you can see the Atlantic Ocean. I had a palm tree in my front yard. I had eucalyptus trees in my backyard. The weather is perfect. It's like a small, it's like a small base. Like we had 50 seniors in our high school class. It's like small town America, just like put in Spain. And then I also love that my mom is actually Spanish. My dad met her there. So I love being there.
Oh,
But
nice.
one of the new things that happened was I had never done like a spelling bee in school, and there was a spelling bee. So I'm like, I guess I'll try the spelling bee. And so that was the first program I ever wrote, is I coded like all the words in, and it would like flash up on the screen to help me like memorize the words for my spelling bee program.
Wow.
So that was like, I remember I hit the space bar and it would like flash to the next word. So I was sitting there coding. I think that's one of the first things that got me coding, was doing that,
Okay.
so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to hear. Perfect. So you said you have Spanish. That means you speak Spanish?
I do, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You want to say something to the folks who are in Spanish, like who speak Spanish? Just
Sure. Bienvenidos, amigos. Espero que les guste esta entrevista.
Awesome. Whatever that means. I'm pretty sure it means
said,
something positive.
welcome everybody, and I hope you enjoy the interview in Espanol.
Perfect.
And I would, the one thing is I want, as being half Spanish, one thing I want to do. So the Lean Product Playbook has been translated into several languages. The Thai version actually just came out.
Thai version? Oh,
Thai.
wow. Okay.
It's out in Chinese, Turkish, and Polish. And then for the India market, it's actually in English, but it's like a paperback, lower cost version. And then the Russian version is in the work. There was a Spanish version that was supposed to be done, but then the publishers kind of fell through. So that's one of my bucket list items, being half Spanish and seeing the growth of PM in a lot of Latin countries. I would love to do a Spanish version. So if anybody watching this knows a Spanish publisher that would like to do it, vamos a charlar un poquito de eso.
Perfect. All right. All right. So this is a little bit crazy question, but maybe you'll like it. If I were to give you a time machine and you wanted to go, if you can go back and learn something at an early age, that could help you become even much better product manager.
Yeah.
What would that be?
What's interesting is it's interesting in 2000, let me get the year right. Yeah, in 2005, after working on my third web product, I mentioned I coded as a kid. I was an electrical engineering major where I also did some coding. Even in the nuclear power program, we had to do some reactor simulations. I coded those. And then I took a master's degree class at Virginia Tech where I ended up prototyping something in Visual Basic. So I've always kind of done a little programming here and there in different languages. But in 2005, after my third web product, I'm like, you know what? The web's here to stay, and I know how to code. I just don't know how to code this web stuff. So let me go learn. So I took like 20 hours a week. I just let me just bite the bullet. I took like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, MySQL, Unix, Apache, Photoshop. I was like, let me just do this. And that's actually how I stumbled into being a consultant, because I was taking 20 hours a week of classes, and this startup offered me a VP of product job. And I really liked the team, but I'm like, I can't work full time. Can we work out some part-time hourly gig? So what I would say, it's interesting because, part of me wonders, gosh, would it have been cool to learn HTML and all that stuff earlier when the web came out? Could I have done a web startup earlier? Perhaps, part of it too is a lot of those languages and the browsers, it was very messy. Like the browsers didn't have a lot of good standards compliance. Anyway, that's one idea that comes to mind. The other is actually design. And in several interviews, I like to mention how when I went to Intuit, falling into product management was pretty natural because of the training that I had at the submarine place. Even though it was kind of software, the one thing that was new and different was UX design. And I realized that as a PM, I could do all the best user research and write the best requirements, the best prioritization. Back in the days when we would write those long MRDs or PRDs that nobody read, right? I could just do the best job there. But if we fall down on the UX design, then that doesn't matter. So you need both. You need to have really good requirements and you need good UX design. So as soon as I learned that, I went out of my way to read books on it. There weren't a lot of books at the time, and take classes on it, on I took HCI, human computer interaction classes. And so I think design is another area that, something would have been nice to do a little bit earlier in my career versus later. So those are two things, potentially like web coding and design, perhaps a little earlier, but I think everything worked out okay as it is. I'm pretty confident in those two fields now. I learned what I needed to learn. But perhaps if I'd done it a little earlier, who knows? Yeah.
Great. Perfect. In your teens, where do you remember anything you want to mention that you did, whether it was like a failed startup attempt or anything that you want to mention that you can think of that I guess led you to engineering or becoming a product manager later on? But any memories from your early teens, mid-teens?
Oh, teenage years.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. No, just again, I was just like, I would just, I played a lot of computer games like all my friends. And so I also I really appreciate good game design. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And it's funny because we recently got together with, which is design. I mean,
Okay.
let me go on a side. Design,
Please,
in
please do.
in the software world, people associate design with UX design, sometimes mainly with visual design. But as someone who's worked in design as a real engineer and done UX design for me, if you go way the highest level, it's how do you, create something that's going to meet some objectives, right? And so game design, UX design, submarine design, you may think of them as very different, but at one level, they're all very similar, right? It's like, what are you trying to accomplish, right? And so thinking about game design reminds me of design in that broader context. Like, why do I like this game so much? It's because they've done a really good job. So I think that, probably subconsciously picked up some good design principles from those games and, and what I liked and what I didn't like. And then I continued to program. And then, when you get into high school, you start taking physics and calculus and things like that, geometry. I loved all those classes. I especially remember my geometry teacher, Mr. Gay. You'd roll in each morning, need to have a homework there. And, so another thing I haven't really had a chance to talk about too much that I'm really passionate about is first principles thinking. And you hear a little bit more about it. Like Elon Musk kind of mentioned this. I don't think he wrote a lot about it. He just kind of mentioned it. So there's a lot of people mentioning it. There's not a lot of good guidance. First principles thinking. And it always reminds me of geometry, because in geometry, you start with a blank sheet of paper and you have to use theorems and postulates to prove something. It's like, okay, prove this, right? And that's what first principles thinking is. You start from nothing and you build a case. In fact, my lean product process, the product market pyramid, is first principles thinking. You start with nothing and you say, okay, who's the target customer? Great. Now we're going to build on that and say, what are their underserved needs? Great. Now what should our value prop be? You see what I mean? So it's kind of a good engineering concept, because when you don't do that, what happens is you don't start on a solid foundation. You kind of jump in the middle of some line of reasoning. And I see this happen all the time, especially with junior PMs or junior designers. They'd be like, we got to go change this thing. I'm like, why do we need to change it? Well, because to fix this thing. And they don't realize, the real complexity. The other thing I would say is it was fortunate working on submarines early in my career, because it's a very complex product with multiple systems that are interconnected. And you have to survive in that environment. You have to understand, be able to model in your head complex systems and complex interdependencies. And I would argue most modern software is complex, right? It's hard for any one person to really understand all the different modules and parts of the software and how they connect. But that's kind of what you need to have good software. Otherwise, you make a change over here, you don't realize that you break something over here. It has an impact like that, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of first principles thinking, and if and when I have some time, I would love to write some thoughts about that. Because, but back to your question, in teenage years, I took geometry class, which kind of was a first principles thinking kind of class. I still, to this day, I love physics. That's kind of one of the areas I geek out on, whether it's following gravitational waves from LIGO or, whatever the Large Hadron Collider is doing these days. So that's what I like to do.
How about gaming? Do you still love gaming?
I'm an aspirational gamer. And what I was going to say before I went on the design tangent is I recently had a birthday with my friends, and some of them were from my teenage years in Spain. And some of them were friends I made later, but we're all from the same age. And so they also played all the same games. And so I found my old Commodore 64 in the garage. You can't actually hook it up to a modern TV because it's got this weird cable. So I went online the Tuesday before I was supposed to get together with my friends. I found the cable. I emailed the guy, can you please FedEx it? And he rushed it. We got it. And so we fired it up and it worked. And we played a couple of our old games. It was awesome. So,
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really amazing story. And I can relate to that. I wanted to become a game designer as well. That's what I thought when I came to US. I actually started learning 3D Max and all 3D tools and stuff.
Nice.
But at the end, I didn't get the right guidance. I ended up going to architecture major, the closest, but I never graduated from that either. But anyway, I learned AutoCAD and stuff. But
that's great. Well, I'll tell you what, it's funny because obviously you can come from any field to be a PM, but I've found that architect majors or architecture people they're overrepresented in product management. As well as mechanical engineers. So I had I remember on my Intuit team, I had a lot of rockstar PMs on my team because we were very fortunate to be able to recruit the best. And one was a mechanical engineer, and pretty much kind of my prodigy person there. And the other was an architect, actually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Good to hear that.
Yeah.
And a 3 semester.
And I think the reason why is because as an architect, we recently remodeled our house. And so I got to see what the architect did is you've got to think about what are the goals, what are the objectives, what are the requirements, what are the constraints, and you've got to, work cross-functionally across different dimensions of mechanical, electrical, things like that. So anyway.
Totally agree. Perfect. All right. So let's keep moving. We got, I think I want to make sure we try to cover as much as possible.
Sure.
Biggest mistake, or I won't say failure, mistake as a PM you think you have made and learned, the biggest learning from it in your entire PM career, if you were to think of something specific.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be the startup that I did, your version, because a couple factors that I learned from that. One, I was excited to be CEO and co-founder of a company, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I would probably change a few things, but net, I would do it all over again. It was perfect timing because I got to actually apply all those coding skills that I learned, and that's what really solidified them. You know, you can learn in class, but then I was effectively the VP of engineering for that startup, right? We had developers, and I would kind of architect. That would be the DBA. I would like review their code, things like that. So it was great. I would code myself. A lot of the coding was myself. But a couple things with that startup. I guess the one thing is we never, because it was bootstrapped, it was like 2007, 2008. That was when like Sequoia RIP deck came out. It was like nuclear winter for startups, right? We were bootstrapped. And so I never really, back to this point about design, I never had like a rock star design resource on the team. I would get a few hours here and there from some of my friends that are talented, but we never really had a rock star design. I mean, our design was pretty good, but it, and in fact, when we presented on stage at TechCrunch, Marissa Meyer complimented us on it. Now, I think the interaction design was good. The usability was good because I followed the advice in my book, and we kind of did a bunch of user tests to make sure the usability was good. But I do think that, you have the ability to wow, especially on iOS apps and things like that. The bar is so high these days that if you can really get a rockstar designer, you can really wow someone and grab people. And that's the delight factor. You know what I mean? The delight factor. The other thing was we kind of underinvested. We kind of got by coding with the team that we had because we could, but the iPad came out during that time frame. And that was, in hindsight, the perfect platform for a news product. If you think about Flipboard is like the last remaining product in that category. The news category is very tough because nobody pays for news, right? So Flipboard is kind of like one of the last products in that category. They've raised a lot of money. I hope they can find some exit somehow. But anyway, the iPad came out, and we had a very talented like CS grad student who tried to learn Objective-C and learn all that stuff. But it would have been way better if we had like an experienced iOS, or Objective-C developer who could come in and just blow it out. So what it makes me think about is you've got these windows of opportunity sometimes that you need to capitalize on, and you got to be careful not to underinvest in your resources. You know what I mean? Like with the right skill sets, right? And so as longer I work in my career, the more I'm like, gosh, I'd rather wait a little bit longer and get the right team member or contractor who can be a 10x, you hear about the 10x developer or the 10x designer. They really do exist. I was fortunate Intuit to work with a 10x engineer on our project. It was amazing, So that's kind of what I think about is, you can overinvest, you can underinvest. And so you need to think about what are the critical skills of the project for success for the project that you're working on, and make sure you're not underinvesting on those critical skills.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to that advice. All right. So I'm going to ask you this question. This was asked to Steve Jobs. And it's not really difficult for you. I just don't want to scare you, but he took 20 seconds to respond. He just thought about 20 seconds before he responded. But
okay.
I think you don't have to take that much, I think. So the question is, how do you order your priorities, and what's most important to you in the development of a product?
Yeah. So fortunately for me, I have a framework for that, the product market fit pyramid.
I know.
And so the most important thing is making sure you explore the problem space and define the problem space, I would say, right?
Okay.
Like, are you clear on what are all the different problems that you could solve for this person, for this target customer, right? Okay. And then the next thing you would do to prioritize it is you run it through my importance versus satisfaction framework, right? And you'd look for something in the upper left quadrant, something that's high importance, but low satisfaction. And that's how you create the most customer value. So that's the number one thing. Far too often teams go rushing in with solutions, right? We should build this feature, or they start designing things. Like busting out the sketch and doing visual designs before we even clear about who the customer is and what the problems are. So for me, that's the number one. You work your way, you start your way at the bottom and you work your way up. And those first two steps of target customer and problems are very related. So, you may start at problems and then go to customers. You might go to customers and problems, but eventually you want to define that problem space, identify what are the big opportunities to create customer value, right?
Okay, great. So when it comes to making data-driven decisions, how much do you believe in data versus maybe, how do I put this, like a gut feeling about some feature? Do
Yeah.
you completely, was there any situation where your data was wrong? I don't know, like how.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, yeah, and I think a couple things, I talk about this in some of my talks about the difference between kind of qualitative data or qualitative information. I usually reserve data for analytics, but
right,
for quantitative and then quantitative, but it's both information,
right,
whether you want to use the word data or not, right? So there's qualitative information or learning you can get by interviewing users and talking to users. And there's quantitative data you can get through analytics and perhaps surveys where you get it at scale, right?
right.
And so I think I call the qualitative, just to make it fun and personify it, I call the qualitative approach the Oprah approach, because Oprah is really good at sitting down with someone and getting them open up and learn all about them. And I call the analytics approach Spock, because he's all about the data, right? So some people naturally gravitate towards Oprah, some gravitate towards Spock. And the reality is, it's kind of like your left and right arms. You may be right-handed, but you need to learn to build that other muscle in order to do. So good products are almost always a combination of good qualitative and quantitative insights. Now, to your point about instinct and gut, I will say someone who's worked in a space, for a while and has been immersed in quant and qual data, they usually can get a good gut feeling. So it'd be easy to say, no, always go with the data. But I've been there, especially like when I worked at Intuit, we were so customer centric. I was so steeped in all this data and stuff that I kind of got to the point where I could know like which of the things we're thinking about, which ones do I think customers will most value? And then we would go validate it. Obviously we wouldn't just go build stuff because of a gut instinct, but the gut your instinct informs kind of which things are you going to focus on and you think are going to come out as the highest priority. And then you go validate them with users, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, because I think when product managers or product leaders like Steve's job, I don't know how much data-driven decision he used to make to come up with a new product. I mean, it's just, I strongly feel there was a lot of gut feeling, or he was fed with a lot of data and interviews and stuff like that. But I guess that's exception.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I talk about this too, is like Apple, everyone likes to point out how Apple doesn't do market research. Some people like to use that as an excuse not to do market research themselves. And what I like to say is, do you think you're the next Steve Jobs? Okay. You think you're that good, what I would say is, perhaps what either he didn't do that research or it wasn't as visible, but I think he had a lot of insight into what the customer problems were.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it doesn't really matter how you get to that insight. If you're right, you're right. Right. Having data increases the odds of you being right. Right. And, just thinking about what is deficient about today's products, what opportunities are there? What opportunities is the new technology going to provide and enable? And I think that's where his genius was, sitting at the intersection of what are the customer problems and kind of like what new technical trends can we create or push forward and combine those two. That's really the genius of it. I think is you have to be, but there's so many examples of people who are just technologists or solution space. And they go, I'm just going to build this cool thing. I think it's super cool. And it doesn't sell because they never were clear on the problem. So I think Steve Jobs, as much of a technologist and forward thinker as he was great at tying it back to, I know this is going to create customer value because it's going to address this customer need.
And I think people forget he had his fair share of failures as well.
Sure.
It was, so definitely.
Yeah. In fact, in the very beginning of the book, I talk about one of those, right? I talk about two things on Apple. One is when they first added the fingerprint ID on the phones, right? They didn't do any market research. So theoretically, it could be like, someone who's like a heavy Spock head could be like, oh my gosh, how could you launch the phone without testing it with millions of users beforehand, right? Or thousands of users beforehand. But that's where we go back to first principles thinking and we go, okay, what problem is that solving? It's making you be able to log into your phone faster. We can quantify this. We can say, well, on average, how many times does the average person log into their phone? 30, 40, 50 times a day. When they have to type in a 4 or 6 digit PIN, how long does it take? We can add up all the time it takes to type in those PINs 50 times a day. And then we can say, well, here's the time savings we expect to achieve with the thumbprints or fingerprints.
Right.
That's a no-brainer. If you can be like, look, we're going from this many seconds to this many seconds, there's not a lot of risk. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's one where it's like, you have a logical case why it should create a lot of value. Now they could have got surprised by something like, hey, people have weird fingerprints. They didn't do enough tests. They could have got burned by some other uncertainty they didn't know about, what we call the unknown unknowns, but they didn't.
Right.
Counterexample was, Apple is really big on design, speaking of design, and sometimes design goes a little too far and it gets in the way of function. We talk about form over function, right? They have such an aesthetic quality Now, it doesn't happen that often, and in general, they make the right calls and their aesthetics are really good. But on the MacBook Pro, I'm looking at my MacBook Pro here while I talk to you. The keyboard, the power button for the MacBook was always like a separate button offset from the keyboard, indented, so that you couldn't accidentally hit it with your finger. Like if you were gonna hit the power button, it was because it was deliberate, because it was indented and it was a separate button.
Right.
Evolution, they suddenly say, you know what? It's kind of weird that button doesn't look like all the other keyboards on the keys on the keyboard. Let's make it like a keyboard key, right? And they put it in the upper right corner. What's in the upper right corner of your keyboard? The delete key. What's one of the keys you use the most? The delete key. And so it was an unfortunate combination of two things. That by itself wouldn't have been too bad. But what happened is when you tap that by accident, you have a fat finger and you hit that, a pop-up would come up and say, do you want to power down your device? Do you want to sleep your device, right? So these annoying pop-ups were coming up. And then unfortunately, at the very same time, I think it was they launched Mavericks. They launched a new operating system that changed the behavior when you tap that. Instead of it having a dialogue that asks you, it would instantly put your MacBook Pro to sleep. So now all of a sudden, because the combination of the hardware design change and the software change, all these MacBook users are pissed off because they keep hitting that by accident and they're in the middle of whatever they're working on, their MacBook Pro goes to sleep. So Apple doesn't always get it right. That was an example where some testing probably would have caught that, right?
Yeah, my wife just got the new iMac, the slim one that looked pretty nice, and she was a Windows user, and she was complaining, and she was sort of false in the UX, and I couldn't really respond to her to Apple's defense. Like, there was it seemed like some stupid UX, but she got used to it eventually, I guess. But people coming from Windows, I think for them, like, the right click is missing and stuff like that on the mouse, and I don't know, like stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was a longtime PC person, switched to Mac. So you have to, it's not like it's right or wrong or dumb or anything. It's just different UX standards. And so you learn. And so luckily one of my friends is a longtime Mac user. He gave me some Power Pro tips. And so now when I go to use Windows, I feel the way your wife feels.
Absolutely. You can't go back to Windows, of course. Obviously. Yeah. I told her, just be patient for 2 weeks, then you can never go back to Windows.
Yeah. You got to make it a point to learn the new UI things, and then your life is a lot easier and better.
And now she's like, after a month, she's already selling to everybody else how good Mac is, but you got to be patient with Mac. All right. So need some advice from you, Dan, to newcomers who are thinking of PM career. Do you have any advice for them, especially post-COVID? Do you feel like there has been change in the industry, and you want to advise on any new skill set the PM should learn? Yeah,
I mean, I think the one thing is people are much more open to remote work. So that can, I guess it can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you don't need to live in one of the main tech hub areas to get a job. That's one thing. But then it also opens up the whole labor market. So now you're competing with the bigger labor. So your opportunities have expanded, but now you're competing with the larger labor market, I guess. But the fundamental thing with PM is when you're trying to break into PM, there's that catch-22 of people don't want to hire you as a PM unless you have PM experience. So it's like, how do you break out? How do I ever get PM experience if nobody ever gives a chance on me, right? That's the catch-22. And so you got to find some way to break through that. And, so it's like, what can you do to increase your appeal to recruiters? Because they, for whatever reason, they perceive it as a risk. Or why, I'm hiring this person who hasn't done PM. That's riskier than hiring someone that has done it, right?
Okay.
They don't really, so how can you reduce that perceived risk?
Right.
Going to product school and having that on your resume, that's one way to reduce perceived. Okay, they haven't done PM, but at least they've done product school, right?
Right.
Other stuff is, I'm a big fan of when you're trying to break into PM, like, do you have a personal website? Why not? I used to always joke like with people, like they're trying to break into PMs, like, oh, you want to be a web PM? Where's your website? Oh, I don't have a
portfolio,
website.
Like portfolio.
Yeah, totally. It's like, okay, you're trying to hustle and be a web PM and you don't even have a website. Like, guess what? The people we're hiring, they have websites.
Right.
They figured out how to get a website. It's not that hard these days with Squarespace and WordPress and Wix and stuff, right? So it's like, I would just say, like, walk the walk, like have a website. And then to your point, a portfolio. And you may be like, well, I'm a PM. I'm not a PM. I don't have any portfolio. But, people hustle and find a way. I've seen people trying to break into PM. They will do like product teardown. Yeah, I just use Slack. And here's what I think they did well. Here's what they didn't do well. If I was to redesign Instagram, here's what I would do. And you don't need to be some crazy designer or crazy PM rockstar. Just sharing your thoughts.
Right.
It shows you're really serious about it. You're thinking about it. It exposes your thinking. Do a side project, either on your own, do a side project, or help a startup out, do a pro bono internship, get some wireframe, do some wireframing, do some road mapping. If you need to redact it, hide some info, fine. It's sensitive, just redact it, blur it out. But then, if you go to someone, if I got 2 candidates, neither one's done PM, and I Google your name or I go to your LinkedIn, and one of them has a website that looks good, that's logically organized, where they highlight their experience, and they have like portfolio examples of teardowns and wireframes and roadmaps, and the other person has nothing, it's a no-brainer who you're going to hire, right? I mean, just who's going to get the interview? Because then the number one challenge is, can you get the interview? Because once you get the interview, that's another ball game of how you impress people. But you want to get the interview, and so you need to think about, what is the online presence that I'm presenting to people, So it's like, if you want to be a product manager, make sure when somebody looks at your LinkedIn profile and they Google you, that it looks like you want to be a product manager. It's funny because I sometimes help clients with recruiting, and you get people applying for jobs and their title is biz dev or sales. I'm like, if your title is not product manager and you're applying for a product manager job, I'm done. The second I see your title's not PM, no.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I agree with you. I guess some sort of failed attempt on any product that you tried, mock-ups, I guess. And I've seen a lot of these UX designers do a great job, and product managers can learn from it. They take any product like, Slack or Yelp, and they try to recreate the design, imagining, okay, what if they were the UI designer, how would they design that? So product managers can take that approach.
Other things too, like book reviews, it's so funny because now there are PM book clubs emerging, and they're doing teardowns and they're doing stuff like that. It's just, you read an article, you comment on an article. There's all kinds of ways to engage,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just want to add, when I went to product school, one of the best thing I would say, in addition to what I learned from there, the network I built. I was able to leverage that the new product managers to test my product, what I was building around that time. And I was able to do one-on-one user interviews with them. And it really helped with my launch. We changed the product at the early stage when I got the feedback. So when you're going to product school or any of such institutes, it's not just about, just learning, but it's the network and people who you meet, I guess.
And that's why meetups are great, or product conferences are great, right? And
absolutely.
That's, at my meetup, which you went to, people would network ahead of time at the beginning before the speaker started, and people would hang out and network afterwards. So it's good to meet other people that are kind of going through what you're going through.
Absolutely. And we used to get to win a lot of good stuff like books, and I don't know if you still do that, but
we do. In fact, we've upped the game. I have a formal book sponsor now. So
oh wow, okay.
And that's what I like to do, is all my friends are these speaker authors. So like back in December when Marty Kagan's second book came out, Empowered, we gave away like 110 copies from our book sponsors. We just recently did that also with Teresa Torres, Continuous Discovery Habits, and also Christina Woodkey's second edition of her Radical Focus. So we always, everyone in our meetup values learning and knowledge, and so books are a great way to do that. So we try to do that, especially when someone's got a new book coming out. I don't know if you went to any of the book signing events that we did. We would have the authors come in and do the book signing. So we do a digital version of that now.
I actually attended Neil Iyer.
Yeah, Nir Ayal.
From Unhook.
Unhook. We did that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely considering to get him on the interview as well. I'm on Twitter with him. I chat with him sometimes. So he's a great guy, great book.
Yeah.
So okay, we're getting into the last round, which is rapid fire round.
Okay.
Some fun. Okay, so let's hopefully we can wrap this up in next 10 minutes. Okay, so if you had a choice to choose between coder PM versus UX PM, who will you pick? Technical.
I would pick a UX PM.
UX PM. Okay. One product you cannot live without if you were to send to moon.
My MacBook Pro. I use it all the time.
Okay. 3 products of all your favorite. 3 best product you consider your favorite all time.
Okay. Well, Quicken, I was the head of product manager for Quicken, and I still use it every day. Excel, I'm a huge Excel, just for anything. And now it's Google Sheets, but Excel kind of was the original idea. And then, I'm also on my iPhone all the time. So the iPhone's a pretty amazing invention.
Okay. Who do you consider as the number one PM? Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos?
I gotta say, give it to Steve Jobs as far as PM goes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Jeff
Perfect.
Bezos is an amazing business person.
Okay.
And Elon Musk is a talented technical person. But I think of those three, if I had to pick, I'd pick Steve Jobs.
Okay. Perfect. Makes sense. Your 3 favorite books. Doesn't have to be PM books. Just
okay. So one of my favorite books is Ready Player One by Ernie Klein.
Ready Player One. Okay.
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 It's fiction. It's fiction, but it's like amazing fiction. It's fun. It's just a fun plot. It has a lot of 80s references. Speaking of computer games and arcades and stuff like that. So for anyone that grew up in the 80s that likes sci-fi, it's great. And then, these days I listen to audiobooks and Will Wheaton narrates it. And he just does an amazing job narrating. When you have an audiobook narrated by someone who does a good job, it makes a big difference. So
absolutely.
Ready Player One would be one of those books.
There was a movie about it, right?
They did, yeah. They made a movie, yes.
Okay,
and in fact, the
I
sequel,
watched the movie, yeah.
yeah. The book is way better than the movie.
Okay.
And Ready Player Two, the sequel book is out. They're supposedly making a movie about it.
Awesome.
Other books that are my favorite books. This is an older book too. Is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a humor sci-fi by Douglas Adams from the 80s. That was like one of the first sci-fi books that I read, and it was so funny. I think it's so hard. I think I can be a funny guy live like this. I can tell jokes, but conveying humor in writing is a really hard thing to do. And he just had a great imagination. So Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So far we got 2 sci-fi books. So you can see where my things lie. And let's see what else. I'm trying to think of other books that I reread. Basically, like I like to say, when you go back and reread something, that tells you it's like your favorites, right? That product market fit is when you go back and use something again and again and again, whether it's a book or a movie or a restaurant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just gonna go for 2.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. How about any product related books that doesn't have to be product, but product growth hacking / growth hacking?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple things. So in my book,
we are giving away a free copy of this amazing book to one lucky winner. For more details, please check out the pinned comment on this video.
I referenced 4 books. Okay. And most of them, 2 of them were basically like, remember I mentioned I just like, as an Intuit, a PM at Intuit, I didn't know any, I basically was like trying to be a sponge. I learned everything at Intuit from everybody I could, but also I sought whatever books were around, and especially on UX design. So one of the books, and one of my favorite authors and thought leaders is Jeffrey Moore, who did Crossing the Chasm. So he's written a lot of books, and I've hosted him twice at the meetup. It's always a pleasure. And when I was at Stanford, they had this thought leader series on Friday afternoons. They'd bring in a lecturer, and I would just go. And I remember every time he had a new book, he would come. And so you get to hear from him. So my favorite book of his is Inside the Tornado. It's actually his second book. So he wrote Crossing the Chasm, and then he wrote Inside the Tornado. The reason I like Inside the Tornado better is because he basically summarizes Crossing the Chasm and then builds from there. So you get everything, kind of most of the stuff. But I would read those 2 books. So Jeffrey Moore is one of my favorite authors. And then I was super excited. So the importance versus satisfaction framework that I share in my book for how to prioritize problems and figure out which ones are the most underserved needs and which ones are going to create the most customer value. I developed that at Intuit. And then a few years after I left Intuit in 2003. And in 2005, I remember being at the Stanford Library, and they had like some books displayed, and I saw this book called What Customers Want. And the title kind of grabbed my attention. And so I checked it out and I read it, and it was great. And it's by Tony Ulwick, who's one of the pioneers of jobs to be done. So he's someone else who really understands the need to really get deep in the problem space. And so he also, what made me I thought was super cool, is he independently developed importance versus satisfaction as a framework when he was trying to figure out how can I maximize customer value. So the fact that somebody else besides me also concluded this was a good way to look at things gave me a lot of validation and made me feel good about it. The only difference is the way he calculates his score is a little different than how I calculate the score. You're going to get the same conclusions, but the mechanics of how you calculate it is a little different. So that book, What Customers Want, if you like this, if you really like the problem space and getting kind of rigorous about prioritizing things, I recommend his book. And that's one of the books that I referenced, right? Awesome. So those are 2 books that I like a lot. And then one of the other books, there weren't that many UX books back in the day. And so there's a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum by Alan Cooper, which is also referenced in my book. And he's like the person who really championed personas a lot. But it's a
Okay.
funny book. It's entertaining and it's educational. So those are some of my books that I like.
Awesome. 3 favorite movies.
This is tough. So I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So
Okay,
Star Wars.
part 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so Empire Strikes Back is most hardcore Star Wars fans think that Empire Strikes Back was like the best one, and I agree. And then the original Star Wars is the number 2. But we'll
You
just
can
put all
only say
Star
Star Wars.
I know, yeah. Empire Strikes Back, and then I love Blade Runner.
Okay, the new or the old? Yeah.
Both, but the
Okay.
old one, the old one, which there's like 5 different versions of, by the way,
Okay.
because the guy can't make up his mind on. He keeps cutting it differently.
Okay.
And then I also love like The Godfather.
Godfather. Okay.
Godfather,
All right.
yeah.
Interesting.
I recently read the book, the audio book.
Oh wow.
Just because I like the movie so much. And it's amazing. A lot of times when they make the movie, they deviate quite a bit.
Right.
This was like the line for line was like identical from the book. So I thought that was pretty cool that they stuck to the book.
I was just hoping you're gonna say Terminator. Judgment
I
Day.
like that one. I definitely, especially when I was a kid. If you asked me when I was a kid, I would probably tell you Terminator. But
I
Star
just
Wars,
watched it last.
I saw Star Wars when I was a kid with my dad, and it was so popular. Like the line went around the block of the theater. We didn't make it into the movie until like 10 minutes into the movie. So and back then there wasn't any Netflix or anything, and there was no VHS. So it's like I just missed the first 10 minutes of the movie till I got the VHS.
VHS. What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you probably know Betamax. That's what you know. That's right. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
I'm joking.
I know
I'm
VHS. Yeah, I know that. You need to blow some air.
Yeah, Betamax was the better product that lost out to VHS because of bad marketing. So yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. So I think you probably touched at this point different time during the interview, but if you had to pick 3 people, that can be your father, a writer, a philosopher, a spiritual leader, who would you pick? 3 people that inspired you the most, who you are today, to become who you are today?
Oh, I see. That inspired me.
Or influenced you, inspired
definitely
you.
My mom and dad.
Okay.
Definitely my mom and dad get spots 1 and 2.
Okay.
And then they get the top 2 spots. And then, I would say, even though I never interact with him personally, I mentioned Hyman Rickover.
Okay.
It's kind of like Apple.
From Navy,
the culture of naval reactors, he created the culture of naval reactors. That technical meritocracy, he created that whole thing. So even though he hadn't been there for several years, it's like his ghosts were walking the hall and people would invoke, like, what would he do? And all the systems and processes he put in place were still there. So, he's someone that I, like I said, that I look up to.
Okay, perfect. Name one skill you cannot survive as a PM in the business industry. One skill set.
Prioritization.
Okay, perfect.
Because there's way more ideas than time. You got to be able to prioritize.
PMs are born or made?
I think they can be made. I think you can. I think you can be born with some, some intrinsic capabilities and abilities that will have higher likelihood of success. But you can definitely be made. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we can wrap up here. I think that's
okay.
I guess. Thank you so much, Dan, for your time. Really appreciate it. This was really awesome. Hopefully, I can have you sometime again later on. But this is great. Thank you so much. Any last comments?
No, Sam, thanks, man. I'm glad. Thanks for having me on here. And I'm glad we got to cover some of those topics. And just last piece of advice is always just don't forget about the problem space. Start with the problem before you do the solution.
Okay. I'll remember that. Hopefully the audience too. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you were able to learn something new from this video. Just let me know in the comments what you thought about this interview, any feedback, anything that you were able to personally relate to, any stories that Dan mentioned that really inspired you, and hope to see you soon again in my next video. Till then, goodbye.